Amira had learned to live without the warmth of affection. From the moment her father passed, everything in her life twisted into shadows. Once the pride of her father's eyes, she was now the invisible ghost that haunted the corners of the house she once called home. The village of Nduma was small, nestled between green hills and ancient trees that whispered secrets through the wind. But in this quiet village, cruelty often wore the mask of tradition, and silence was the blade that cut deepest. Amira's father had been a gentleman, wise, soft-spoken, with the kind of laugh that could make wild birds settle on tree branches just to listen. He taught her to find wonder in stories, in stars, and in kindness, even when the world gave you none. But when he died, under strange circumstances during a hunting trip, everything changed. His wife, Miriam, did not weep. She wore black, yes, but it was a dry mourning, her eyes never wet, her voice never cracked. Amira was 9 then, and the look Miriam gave her the day after the burial was not of grief but of resentment, like she was a burden she could no longer ignore. Years passed. Miriam became more bitter, more cunning, and all her affection was poured like honey over her own daughter, Layla. Layla was everything Amira was not allowed to be. Dressed in fine colors, fed the best foods, and taught to believe the world existed to serve her. Where Layla walked, people smiled. Where Amira walked, heads turned away. Not because the villagers didn't know her story. They knew. But they convinced themselves they didn't. The abuse was dismissed with shrugs and whispers. "It's a family matter," they would say, shaking their heads but doing nothing. No one wanted to challenge Miriam, who had a tongue sharp enough to make men feel like cowards. Amira became a ghost in her own home. Her feet were always bare, her dresses always worn thin. She was made to rise before the sun and work till stars reappeared. Fetching water, cooking meals she would not eat, cleaning clothes she never wore, and tending the goats that were never hers. The house had 4 rooms, but none belonged to her. She was banished to the animal shed, a wooden structure behind the house that smelled of damp hay and goat droppings. In winter, the cold bit at her skin. In summer, the heat suffocated her. Still, she found ways to survive. Every night before she slept, she would whisper the stories her father once told her. Tales of distant lands where mountains bowed to warriors, and rivers sang lullabies to lost children. Stories where unseen protectors walked among men, shielding the kind-hearted and punishing the wicked. In those moments, she felt closer to him. She would close her eyes and imagine his arms around her, strong and safe, the way they used to be when thunder cracked, and she would crawl into his bed for comfort. But no story could prepare her for the cruelty of the night it rained. It had been a long day. The clouds had gathered since morning, heavy and gray, like the sky itself was mourning something no one could name. Amira had been cleaning the main room when Layla's shrill voice pierced the air. A comb, an expensive, jeweled one Miriam had brought from the city, had snapped in half. It had slipped from Layla's hand while Amira was combing her hair. Amira's hands trembled as she held up the broken piece, her voice shaking as she tried to explain it was an accident. But Miriam's eyes flared with fury, and her voice was a storm all its own. "You think you can touch what doesn't belong to you," she spat, her hand grabbing Amira's arm with bruising force. "You filthy little wretch. You don't deserve to be inside this house." Before Amira could respond, she was dragged by the wrist through the front door. The rain had just begun to fall, soft at first, then harder, as if the heavens had waited for this moment to break. Miriam shoved her onto the muddy ground, her dress soaking instantly. "Sleep where animals do. Better yet, sleep under the sky like the stray dog you are." And then the door slammed shut. At first, Amira just sat there, stunned. The rain didn't feel real. The cold didn't register. Her chest rose and fell with panic, but she was too afraid to cry out. She looked around the yard, but there was no shelter, nowhere to run. The shed was locked. The trees at the edge of the field looked distant, shadowy, like they might swallow her whole. She stumbled to her feet and ran toward the only tree in the compound, a large, old fig tree her father had once planted. Its thick trunk leaned like a tired man, its branches drooping under the weight of its age. She crawled under it, curling into herself, hugging her knees to her chest as the rain poured down harder. The cold wrapped itself around her like a cruel second skin. Her hair clung to her face. Her teeth chattered. Her fingers went numb. But worst of all was the silence. The kind that made you feel forgotten by the world. She sobbed quietly, tears mixing with the rain. No one would come for her. No one would care. Even the villagers, just a few meters away in their huts, would close their shutters and pretend not to hear if she screamed. She felt small. So small. Like if she closed her eyes and disappeared, the world would not even blink. And yet, even in that moment of utter despair, she whispered one of her father's stories. Not loudly. Just enough to hear it herself. The one about the forgotten girl who was watched by the stars, and how one night, when her pain grew too much, the sky sent down someone who changed everything. I don't believe in miracles anymore, she whispered through chattering lips. But somewhere above her, unseen through the curtain of rain, a pair of eyes did. The storm had settled into its fiercest rhythm, wind howling through the trees like a grieving spirit. Rain slashed through the dark like falling knives, soaking the earth until it became a pit of mud and sorrow. Amira didn't move. Her body had gone numb long ago, her soaked dress clinging to her like a second skin. Beneath the fig tree, she lay curled into herself, eyes closed, lips blue, her shivering reduced to the occasional twitch of a finger. She didn't know if she was awake or asleep. Everything was a blur of cold and ache. Along the outer road of the village, a lone figure moved through the night. The man walked steadily, unbothered by the storm. He wore a long hooded robe, elegant, finely stitched, unlike anything worn by the villagers. Its fabric shimmered slightly under the rare flashes of lightning, not with glitter or gold, but with something deeper, older, like it had stories sewn into its threads. His face was mostly hidden beneath the hood, but his eyes were alert, searching, as though drawn by an invisible pull. As he reached the edge of Miriam's compound, something stopped him. A sound? A feeling? The man turned his head slowly toward the fig tree. Lightning revealed her, Amira, a lifeless figure in the mud, her arms wrapped around herself, her body half submerged in water and dirt. For a moment, he did not move. He just watched. Not in pity. Not in curiosity. But with an intensity that suggested recognition, though he had never met her. Then, silently, he stepped forward, his boots sinking into the mud. He approached the girl and knelt beside her. She didn't stir. Her skin was icy to the touch, her lips trembling even in sleep. He removed his robe, carefully, almost reverently, and laid it over her small frame. It was warm, far warmer than any ordinary fabric should have been, and it clung to her like a second warmth, shielding her from the worst of the rain. He tucked the corners around her, ensuring the wind couldn't sneak in. His hand hovered over her face for a moment, almost reaching out to touch her cheek, but he stopped himself. Without a word, without leaving a trace of who he was, the stranger stood and disappeared into the night, swallowed by the trees and the storm, as if he had never existed at all. Morning came slow and gray. The storm had left puddles scattered across the village, and the air was thick with the smell of wet earth. Roosters crowed, goats bleated, and smoke began to rise from early fires. As villagers emerged from their homes, chattering and stretching, their eyes fell upon the girl lying under the fig tree. But it wasn't just that she was still outside, it was the robe. It was beautiful. Even soaked in rain and smeared with dirt, it was clear this garment had not come from any local tailor. The threads shimmered in the light, the seams flawless, the lining stitched with symbols none of the villagers recognized. Whispers began instantly. Whose is it? Where did she get something like that? Did someone give it to her? No one gives anything without wanting something in return. By the time Miriam stepped outside, the crowd had already gathered. She pushed through the circle and froze when she saw her stepdaughter lying in the mud, wrapped in the mysterious robe. Her face twisted, not in concern, but in fury. Amira stirred. The warmth of the robe had kept her from slipping into a fevered sleep, and for once, she didn't wake with the sharp jolt of cold. But as her eyes blinked open and she saw the faces circling her, her breath caught in her throat. She sat up quickly, startled to find herself wrapped in something she didn't remember. The villagers stared at her as if she were some strange animal. "What did you do?" Miriam's voice cut through the murmurs. I don't know," Amira stammered, rising to her feet. "I don't know where it came from. I was sleeping, it was raining." "You harlot!" Miriam screamed, stepping forward and slapping her hard across the face. Amira stumbled. "You laid with some man like the filth you are. Sold your body for cloth. Look at you. You've brought shame to this house." "I didn't," Amira cried, shaking her head as her lip bled. "I swear on Father's name, I don't know who, someone must have seen me, maybe they felt pity." "Liar." Miriam slapped her again. "You shame your father's memory." Some villagers murmured, uneasy, but none stepped in. Layla emerged then, arms folded, eyes gleaming with wicked amusement. "Looks like little Amira's finally found her talent." Tears flooded Amira's eyes, but she refused to cry in front of them. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said through clenched teeth. The robe was torn from her shoulders. Miriam held it up like it was a cursed object. "If no one here will punish you properly, I will make sure the shame never touches this home again." "No, please, wait," Amira begged, but it was no use. They burned it. Right there in the center of the compound. A fire was lit, and the robe was tossed into the flames. The villagers watched in silence as the elegant fabric twisted and blackened, the strange symbols curling into ash. Amira stood frozen, feeling as though something precious, something sacred, was being destroyed. But in the chaos, no one noticed her slip something into the pocket of her dress. It was a small piece of lining she had found tucked inside the robe before it was taken from her. She hadn't meant to take it, but something about it drew her in. It wasn't just fabric, it felt intentional. As though it had been left for her. The cloth was triangular, no bigger than her palm. Embroidered into the corner was a symbol she had never seen before. It looked like a tree with roots made of stars, and a single eye at the center of its trunk. The stitching was impossibly fine, like it had been sewn with strands of hair rather than thread. It pulsed faintly against her skin, like it was alive. That night, back in the shed, she clutched the fabric to her chest. She still didn't know who the stranger was. She still didn't know why he helped her. But deep down, something had shifted. For the first time in a long while, Amira didn't feel completely alone. The village couldn't stop talking. By the third day after the storm, the story had taken on a life of its own. Some claimed the man who had given Amira the robe was a passing warrior, seeking a bride in secret. Others whispered that he was a spirit, an omen sent from the ancestors to choose a girl of pure heart. The story twisted like a vine, winding its way into every conversation at the market, at the well, even in the sacred grove where elders met. No one had seen the man clearly, but everyone had something to say. Miriam, Amira's stepmother, was sick with rage. It gnawed at her, kept her awake at night. She had spent years building a reputation of strictness and piety, an image that masked her cruelty behind closed doors. Now it was unraveling. People were whispering behind her back, not about her piety, but about her stepdaughter. They spoke of Amira's mysterious protector, of the robe too fine for commoners, of symbols they couldn't explain. They speculated, and that speculation threatened Miriam's control. She paced the compound at night, muttering, "Who is he? Why her?" Jealousy and fury twisted in her chest. Layla tried to calm her, but Miriam would lash out even at her. "You must be sharper, girl. If the eyes of men start turning toward her, you'll be forgotten." Layla rolled her eyes, but inside, a sour feeling had begun to grow. It was one thing to bully Amira in private, to mock her rags and snatch away the last of the porridge. But now people were talking to Amira in the market. Some even smiled at her. The blacksmith's son, whom Layla had been flirting with for months, had asked Amira if she was cold and offered her his scarf. She had refused politely, but that wasn't the point. The point was he had asked. Layla began to watch Amira closely. Not out of curiosity, but calculation. Far away from the village, in the dense highlands, a man in a dusty cloak stood atop a rocky hill, looking out at the sunlit valley below. He was tall, with a quiet strength about him, and eyes that saw more than they let on. His name was Malik. Though dressed like a traveler, Malik was no ordinary wanderer. Beneath the worn robe he wore for disguise, he bore the insignia of a noble house from a far-off province. Malik was not just searching the land, he was searching his past. Many years ago, as a child, Malik had been separated from his caravan during a violent storm. He had wandered for days, hungry and afraid, until he was found by a man who carried him through the flood to a small village. The man had no riches, but he had a fire, a blanket, and a gentle voice. Malik never forgot his face, even as the years passed and duty pulled him back to the world of lords and alliances. That village had left a mark on him, a memory of kindness he had never repaid. And just days ago, while traveling undercover to escape political unrest, he had seen her, Amira, curled up in the rain outside that same village. He hadn't meant to interfere. But something about the way she lay there, cold and trembling, had broken him. He hadn't been able to walk away. He hadn't expected to think of her again. Yet now, every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. Not the face of a girl in rags, but the look in her eyes, the quiet strength, the way she hadn't cried when he touched her shoulder, the way she clutched the robe even in sleep, like it was the first warmth she'd felt in years. He didn't know her name. But he was going to find out. Back in the village, Amira sat in the animal shed, her fingers brushing the scrap of embroidered fabric she had hidden in her bodice. By day, it looked simple enough. But by night, under the light of the moon, it glowed faintly, a soft, pale shimmer like dew on silver grass. She had tried to show no one. Not out of fear, but instinct. This belonged to her. It felt as though it was meant for her alone. And then there were the dreams. At first, they came only in fragments, wet leaves, a growl in the wind, the flash of golden eyes. But now, they were clearer. Every night she dreamed of the same image, a lion standing in the pouring rain, its mane dripping, its eyes locked on hers. It didn't snarl. It didn't roar. It watched, like it was guarding her from something unseen. She would wake with her heart pounding, the scrap of cloth warm in her hand. She couldn't explain it, but somehow she felt changed. She was still mistreated. Her meals were still the scraps Layla didn't finish. Her hands were still raw from chores. But something inside her had shifted. She had begun to feel the weight of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. Meanwhile, the villagers whispered more. The young men noticed how her eyes seemed to carry something ancient, how she walked differently now, like someone with secrets. One boy left a flower at the door of the shed. Another offered her a carved bird. Amira said little. She never mentioned the robe, nor the dreams. Miriam noticed. Layla noticed more. One afternoon, as Amira walked back from the stream with a basket of wet laundry, Layla stepped in front of her, arms folded. Don't think just because someone gave you a rag to cover your bones, you're special now. Amira didn't reply. Layla's voice dropped. You're nothing. You'll always be nothing. And then, for the first time, Amira looked her dead in the eye and said quietly, We'll see. Layla flinched. Something about the way Amira said it chilled her. Like a whisper from the wind. Like the promise of a storm yet to come. The village was buzzing again, only this time the whispers carried excitement, not scandal. A wealthy merchant had arrived with guards, gifts, and golden promises. His caravan rolled into the village with shining horses and wagons covered in silk. The elders, always eager to court favor from outsiders, welcomed him with wide smiles and open hands. The villagers gathered at the central square, craning their necks to see the man who traveled with luxury on his shoulders. He called himself Malik. No longer in the tattered traveler's cloak, he wore fine robes of deep green with gold embroidery, his face clean-shaven, his posture upright like a man used to being obeyed. He claimed he was looking for land to invest in, a place to grow tea, to raise cattle, to leave a legacy. He praised the village's location, the honesty of its people. His words were smooth, his voice warm. The elders exchanged glances, delighted by the thought of trade, new roads, and taxes from a rich man's presence. They offered him a feast that very night, and word spread quickly that all villagers were to attend. Amira heard the talk while fetching water from the well. She didn't care. Rich men came and went. They always brought change, but never for people like her. Her world remained the same, hunger in the morning, bruises by noon, silence by sunset. She worked harder than ever now. Miriam, threatened by the rumors of Amira's mysterious protector, had grown more paranoid. She watched Amira like a hawk and punished her for even the faintest smiles. The night of the feast, the village square transformed. Mats were laid out, fires lit, music played from handmade flutes. Trays of spiced meat, sweet bread, and fresh fruit were passed around. Miriam and Layla sat near the elders, dressed in their finest robes. Amira was told to stay home and sweep the yard, but when Miriam grew too focused on impressing the merchant, Amira slipped in and stood near the back, hiding in the shadows like always. Then Malik saw her. He had been smiling politely at the elders' flattery, sipping fermented palm wine and nodding as they spoke of fertile hills and hard-working villagers. But as his eyes scanned the crowd, they locked onto a figure near the edge of the light. Slender frame, bowed shoulders, familiar eyes dimmed with exhaustion. It was her. He had expected to feel relief. Instead, what washed over him was fury. Her face was thinner. Her arms bore faint purple marks. She stood apart from everyone, barefoot, clutching a worn shawl around her shoulders like armor. She didn't recognize him. He asked no questions at the feast. He listened, ate little, and waited. Over the next 2 days, Malik quietly inquired about Amira. Not openly, but subtly, asking stable boys, the old herbalist, a passing merchant woman who had noticed her in the market. Bit by bit, the truth unfolded. They told him of the stepmother who beat her. Of the girl forced to sleep in the shed. Of the rumors about the robe. Of how her dignity had been torn apart in public. The more Malik learned, the colder his anger grew. On the third night, he sent a note. It was passed quietly to Amira by a child from the village. She opened it, puzzled. It said only, "Come to the fig tree near the river, after sunset. Bring nothing. Trust me." Amira debated all afternoon. Was it a trick? Another punishment? But something inside her stirred, a whisper too soft to ignore. After sunset, with the moon barely above the trees, she slipped out. The fig tree stood alone, its wide branches hanging low, like arms offering shelter. She stood beneath it, heart pounding, every part of her alert. Then he stepped out of the shadows. It took her a moment. The face was cleaner. The robe finer. But the eyes were the same. Brown, deep, gentle. "You," she breathed. He nodded. "I didn't want to frighten you that night. I just couldn't walk away." She stood frozen, words failing her. He reached into his satchel and pulled out something wrapped in silk. Slowly, he unwrapped it, a robe, nearly identical to the one burned, rich in fabric, deep in color. It glimmered faintly under the moonlight. "I had another made," he said. "For you." Amira stared at it like it was a dream. Her fingers trembled, reaching out but not touching. "Why?" she whispered. Malik's voice was quiet. "Because you were left in the rain, and no one saw you but me. Because you deserve more than pain. Because no one should sleep outside and be forgotten." She looked down, tears spilling from her eyes, not from joy, but confusion, exhaustion, disbelief. "I'm no one. I have nothing. Why would someone like you?" "You have something no one else has," he said gently. "You survived. You didn't turn bitter. You didn't stop being kind." She didn't answer. She just cried, her shoulders shaking, her hands clenching the edges of her old shawl. Malik didn't touch her. He simply stood near, holding the robe like a vow. "I can't fix everything tonight," he said. "But hold on, Amira. A little longer. I'm not leaving this time. And neither is your story." Then he stepped back into the darkness, leaving her with the silk-wrapped gift and a heartbeat that, for the first time in years, felt like hope. The village prepared itself for the annual Festival of Spirits, a sacred event that blended tradition with spectacle. At the heart of it was the ceremony of the spirit daughter, a ritual rooted in ancient belief that once a year, the spirits would choose a pure-hearted girl to serve as the village's symbolic blessing. That girl would be honored for a season, dressed in white, and offered privileges even above the elders. It was said that the spirits blessed her family with fortune, rain, and fertility. Every year, the chosen girl was expected to pass a trial of fire, a barefoot walk across sacred embers. Only those with clean hearts, the legends claimed, could cross without pain or injury. Whether the spirits judged character or merely fortitude was debated, but the ceremony carried enormous weight in village pride. This year, Layla was the obvious choice. She had been groomed for it all her life. Miriam had spent years feeding the elders' favor with gifts, gossip, and smiles. Layla was lovely, graceful, and knew how to play coy when necessary. Her nomination passed without challenge, until Malik spoke. He stood tall in the middle of the square as the elders announced Layla's selection. His voice, calm yet firm, cut through the air. "I wish to put forward another name." Murmurs broke out. The drummers fell silent. "I nominate Amira," Malik said. Miriam stood immediately. "What madness is this?" The elders looked uneasy. One cleared his throat. "The nomination is already made." "And accepted." Malik looked around, face composed. "Is it a true ceremony, or a charade? If the spirits are watching, should we not give them all choices?" The villagers watched, holding their breath. One elder growled, "This is a sacred rite, not a theater for outsiders." Malik reached into his robes and dropped a heavy pouch onto the elder's mat. The sound of gold coins spilling onto the ground was unmistakable. "Let the spirits decide," he said. "Not politics. Not fear. Gold for your shrine. A fair trial for both girls." Reluctantly, the elders agreed. They could not refuse such an offering, and they could not publicly deny the fairness of the ceremony after taking the merchant's gold. Preparations changed overnight. A second white robe was stitched hastily. Amira was fetched from the shed and told, without explanation, that she would walk across fire. She had no time to protest, and no one to comfort her. When the tailor took her measurements, she barely spoke. When the village women oiled her skin and combed her hair, she sat motionless. Only Malik's silent nod across the courtyard gave her strength. The morning of the trial, the entire village gathered near the ceremonial pit. A long trench of glowing embers stretched across the earth, flanked by 2 carved stones. Smoke rose like incense, and drummers stood poised with carved instruments. The rules were clear, 1 girl at a time. No running. No screams. If the girl fell or turned back, she was unworthy. Layla was first. She approached with confidence, wearing the original spirit daughter robe, her head crowned with flowers. Miriam held her hand and kissed her forehead dramatically. The drums began. Layla stepped onto the embers, and shrieked. The sound tore through the silence like a wail. Her second foot barely touched the coals before she stumbled back, falling into the sand, sobbing, the hem of her robe singed and her feet blistering already. 2 women rushed to lift her, but the damage was done. The crowd gasped in confusion. Whispers started, maybe the spirits had turned. Miriam tried to protest, the coals weren't prepared right. She slipped. But no one listened. Then it was Amira's turn. She looked small and fragile next to the fire. The robe she wore fit awkwardly, it had been sewn overnight from leftover cloth. Her hair was neatly tied, but her face bore the quiet tension of someone who had spent years learning not to cry aloud. The drummers began again. The crowd leaned forward. Amira looked at the embers. Her body shook slightly, but she didn't run. She thought of her father's stories. Of the lion in her dreams. Of Malik's words. She stepped forward. The first coal met her soul with surprising warmth, not pain. A strange calm enveloped her. She walked slowly, each step deliberate, her eyes ahead, not daring to look. The ceremony changed everything. Though the elders tried to downplay it, the entire village had seen what happened. Layla's failure, followed by Amira's flawless walk across the burning embers, stirred whispers that could no longer be contained. No excuses could hide what people saw with their own eyes. Amira, thin, quiet, and previously overlooked, had done the impossible. Miriam locked herself in her hut for days, refusing visitors. Layla wept until her voice went hoarse, blaming Amira, blaming the coals, blaming the spirits. But Malik? Malik watched with the stillness of someone waiting for a long-forgotten truth to bloom. He sent for Amira days after the trial, asking her to meet him at the edge of the forest, away from curious eyes. She was hesitant at first, the memory of the ceremony still raw in her mind. But something pulled her toward him, not fear, not gratitude, but a quiet knowing that whatever he had to say, it mattered. When she arrived, Malik was seated beneath an ancient fig tree, the same one she'd curled under that stormy night, the same one where he first saw her. He gestured for her to sit. Amira sat slowly, unsure. "Why me?" she asked. "Why did you give me the robe that night?" Malik didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into a finely stitched leather satchel and pulled out a folded cloth. He laid it in her hands, a piece of a robe, identical in fabric and color to the one she remembered. Embedded within its lining was a glowing thread of gold, and in the center, a symbol. A circle, surrounded by leaves, with a lion at its heart. That symbol, Malik said softly, is not just embroidery. It marks a protector's vow, a seal of guardianship passed through generations. Amira stared at it. Her fingers tingled. This robe belonged to a member of an ancient order, Malik continued, an order of warriors who protected kings, sages, and sacred lands. They were not rich, but they were honored. And once, your father was one of them. Amira's breath caught in her throat. My father? Malik nodded. He was my protector once. When I was a child, during a border conflict, I was separated from my family. Raiders swept through the countryside. I don't remember everything, but I remember the storm, the fear, and then a man appeared from nowhere. He fought off the attackers, hid me in a root cellar, and stayed by my side until the soldiers arrived days later. Tears prickled Amira's eyes. I was just a child, Malik said. He never gave me his name, but I remembered his face. Years later, when I rose in the court, I had portraits made of the protectors from that region. I recognized him immediately. He reached into the satchel again and this time drew out a small, wrapped bundle. He opened it carefully, revealing a necklace. It was simple, just a leather cord holding a silver pendant etched with the same lion insignia. This was found among the belongings left behind that day. I kept it as a memory. I didn't know who he truly was until I saw you, wearing that robe. And when I returned and asked the elders, they told me the story of a man who died mysteriously years ago. A man married to a widow named Miriam. Amira held the necklace as though it were glass. Her fingers trembled. I was told your father died in his sleep, Malik said, but I asked questions. Too many, perhaps. One old man said he saw Miriam arguing with someone the night before. Another claimed he found strange herbs burned in the ashes of your hearth. Poison. Hidden. Amira blinked rapidly, heart pounding. She killed him? She wanted his land. His name. Perhaps she feared his past would catch up. Whatever her reason, it wasn't natural. And the elders, they kept silent. For them, it was easier to let the truth die with him. Silence stretched between them. Amira clutched the necklace and closed her eyes. Memories returned like a tide, her father's laughter, the way he carried her on his shoulders, the stories of unseen protectors, the scent of roasted yams during long rainy nights. and then the silence after his death. The cruelty that followed. The way her world shrunk. "You survived," Malik said gently. "That's more than most could have done. But now, it's time to stop surviving. It's time to remember who you are." She opened her eyes and whispered, "Who am I?" Malik smiled. "You are the daughter of a guardian. A lion's blood runs in your veins. And you wore the robe because the spirits remembered." That night, Amira dreamed again. But this time, the lion didn't just watch from the rain. It walked toward her, bowed its head, and wrapped its tail gently around her shoulders. She woke with tears on her face. Not from pain. Not from sorrow. But from a beginning. The village square had never seen such a gathering. From the tiniest children to the oldest elders, every soul crowded around the council house. Word had spread quickly, a trial, a reckoning, the truth finally clawing its way into the light. People who had turned a blind eye for years now stood restless, eager to witness justice unfold, perhaps to quiet their own guilt. At the center stood Amira, no longer the timid, shivering girl sleeping in the rain. Though her frame was still slight, her shoulders were squared. The robe was gone, but she wore the pendant Malik had given her, her father's symbol, visible against her chest. Malik stood beside her, tall and silent, cloaked in dark blue with his family crest stitched into the trim. The council elders sat stiffly on their mats, murmuring among themselves. Some avoided Amira's eyes. Others watched her with curiosity, even awe. Then came Miriam and Layla. The crowd parted with cold silence as they were led forward. Miriam's face was pale with fury, lips drawn tight. Layla, limping slightly from her burn wounds, clung to her mother's arm, casting glances of disdain and fear toward Amira. A council elder, the oldest among them, rose to speak. "We are gathered to hear the accusations brought forth by Malik of the royal provinces and the girl Amira, regarding the death of her father, Jabber of this village. Let truth rise, and lies fall away." Miriam scoffed loudly. "This is madness. Lies told by a beggar girl trying to worm her way into wealth." But Malik stepped forward calmly, addressing the crowd. "I do not bring tales. I bring truth, and witnesses to that truth." At his signal, two men stepped forward, old servants who had once worked in Jabber's house, driven away by Miriam after his death. They bowed low before the council. One of them, a gray-haired man with a trembling voice, spoke first. "I remember the night Jabber died. He was strong. Healthy. He had spoken of teaching Amira the old guardian chants that evening. But the next morning, he was gone. Cold. I knew something was wrong, but the lady forbade us from questioning it." The second servant added, "There were strange herbs burned in the hearth. I saw Miriam slip something into his tea. But she threatened us. We were dismissed days later." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The elders exchanged glances. Malik produced a scroll, signed witness statements with royal seals, then finally, the piece of cloth. He held it up, and under the midday sun, the symbol on its lining glowed faintly, as if alive. "This was part of the robe worn by Jabber," Malik said. "It bears the guardian's mark, a sacred sign. It was found stitched into the robe I gave Amira, hers by blood, by legacy." Miriam shrieked. "Curses! Witchcraft! That girl is no guardian's daughter. She's a curse on this village. Look at the chaos she's brought." But her voice rang hollow. The villagers had watched Amira walk through fire. They had seen her quiet dignity and the strength with which she carried scars no child should bear. The whispers turned against Miriam now, words like liar, murderess, and cruel-hearted danced through the air. The council elder stood again, his voice firm. "These testimonies are grave. Do you deny you had a hand in Jabber's death?" "I protected my home," Miriam cried. "He was going to send everything to the girl, leave us nothing." "That was his right," the elder replied coldly. "You took a life not yours to take. You let a child suffer under your roof, and silenced those who could have helped her." The verdict came swiftly. In the name of justice, you and your daughter are hereby banished from this village. You will take nothing with you but the shame of your deeds. Never shall you return." Miriam collapsed to her knees, shrieking, but no one stepped forward to comfort her. Layla cried silently, her face pale, mascara smudged down her cheeks. For the first time in her life, she was no longer the adored daughter. As the guards led them away, Amira stood silently. She did not gloat. She did not speak. Her eyes were dry, her jaw tight. She was not happy, but free. And that was enough. After the trial, the crowd gathered around her, awkward and humbled. Villagers who once turned away now approached with bowed heads. "We didn't know," one woman said, her voice barely a whisper. "We failed you," murmured another man. "Please forgive us," Amira, a boy no older than 10, said, clutching her hand. Amira nodded, her voice soft. "I forgave you long ago. I just never thought I'd be strong enough to say it." That evening, Malik took her aside. "You don't have to stay here. There's a world waiting beyond this place. I could take you with me, to royal courts, to sacred lands your father once guarded. You could learn his ways, finish what he began." Amira looked out over the hills, the trees swaying in the wind, the clouds breaking to reveal a deep golden sky. This was her home, but also her graveyard. Her joy and her pain buried in the same soil. Before she could answer, the village elder stepped forward again. "We have wronged you, child. But if there's any grace left in this village, let it be that you stay. Let us rebuild what we allowed to rot. Let us honor your father's name with you." Amira looked between the elder and Malik. Her heart pulled in two directions, toward the promise of adventure, healing, and justice, and toward the people she could finally lead with the strength she had been forced to find. She said nothing yet. That night, she dreamed of her father standing beneath the fig tree. He smiled and said only, "The lion knows when to roam, and when to return." The wind shifted. And Amira woke up ready. The morning was quiet. A tender hush settled over the village, the kind that came before the rain. The skies were heavy, their gray hue mirrored in the silvery mist rising from the fields. Amira stood alone beneath the great tree at the edge of the village, the same tree where she had once curled into herself, soaked and sobbing, a girl discarded by the world. But now, her back was straight. Her eyes were open. She stood in the rain not as a girl cast out, but as a woman choosing to face the sky, daring it to meet her gaze. The droplets fell gently at first, like whispers, and then with more confidence, like a song remembered. Amira closed her eyes, letting the cold water trace her skin. Her heart was calm. The memories came, each one vivid, the sting of her stepmother's hand, the bite of hunger, the lonely nights in the shed, the warmth of a robe not her own. But instead of pain, she felt clarity. She did not hate her past. She had walked through fire and mud in silence. She had been bruised by words and wounds, but she had not broken. Her soul had remained intact, carved perhaps, but not destroyed. Her scars had become maps, paths leading her back to herself. Malik waited nearby, watching her from a respectful distance. He didn't speak. He knew what this moment meant for her. The villagers had not stopped whispering since the trial. Not with cruelty this time, but with wonder. They spoke of her as if she were already a legend. The girl who passed the embers. The child who stood before the council with a lion's courage. The daughter of a guardian. The orphan who turned grief into light. Some called her spirit-touched. Others said she was sent by the ancestors to remind them of their lost honor. But Amira didn't care for titles or tales. What mattered to her was that little girls who were once invisible were now being noticed. She turned away from the tree and walked toward the village one last time. Elder Zubair met her at the gate, his staff tapping against the ground as he approached. "You've changed us," he said. "Even if you don't stay." Amira nodded. "You'll have to keep changing. For the others like me." He lowered his head. "We will." Malik stepped forward, holding out the robe he had prepared for her, a new one, rich in color, lined with both his family's emblem and her father's guardian crest. It was heavier than the first, but comforting, as though two legacies now rested on her shoulders. As she draped it over herself, the villagers gathered, not to gawk or judge, but to witness. There were children at the front, some barefoot, some with wide eyes and timid smiles. A few girls even reached out to touch the hem of her robe, as if to be sure she was real. Amira knelt beside one of them, a girl with tangled hair and frightened eyes. "You matter," she said softly. "Never forget that." Then she rose and faced the village one last time. "I will return," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "Not as a child. Not as a victim. But with bricks and bread. I'll build a place for the forgotten girls. No one will sleep in the mud again." The villagers nodded, many with tears in their eyes. One woman sobbed openly. A man called out, "We'll help you build it." Amira smiled. "Then we begin healing together." Malik offered her his hand. She took it, and they turned toward the road winding away from the village, toward the hills that led to the capital and beyond. The rain followed them gently, not as punishment, but as blessing. The earth drank it greedily, welcoming new life. And with each step, Amira felt lighter. They walked in silence for a while until Malik broke it. "You didn't have to forgive them." "I didn't do it for them," she said. "I did it so I could walk forward." He glanced sideways at her. "You're not the same girl I covered with my robe." "No," she agreed. "That girl died in the rain. This one was born from it." He smiled then, proud and quiet. "You were your father's spirit like armor." Amira looked to the horizon. "I wear my own now." As they vanished into the mist, the villagers stood for a long time watching. Over the weeks and months that followed, stories of Amira's trial spread from one mountain village to another. Songs were sung about the girl who walked through fire. About the spirit robe. About the lion in the rain. Travelers brought back news of a rising guardian in the capital, a young woman advising noble families, speaking in councils, and quietly buying land near her old village. Children began playing games pretending to be Amira. Artists sketched her from memory. Poets gave her names like Rainborn Queen and Daughter of Fire. But Amira cared little for fame. She worked. She planned. She made space in the world for others like her. Her home became a sanctuary, not only for girls, but for anyone who had once been small and voiceless. And every year, on the day she had first been left in the rain, she returned to the great tree at the edge of the village. Not to mourn, but to remember. And with each visit, more and more people came to stand beside her, not above her, not below her, just beside her. For she was no longer the girl in the rain. She was the one who rose from it.